like I said, we're going to be talking about our school garden today, and we have both Rick Swann, who is the author of Our School Garden. Rick is a former elementary school teacher and librarian who has gardened and foraged for food since he was a child growing up in Massachusetts. He co-founded the Slow Food Seattle School Garden program. In addition to writing children's books, his poetry has been published in numerous magazines and anthologies. Hi, Rick, welcome.
Hello.
And Rick, I have a question for you to kind of get us started. Would you rather eat something spicy or something sour?
I would rather eat something sour. I like sour. You know, when I was a kid, I never would have said that, but I now like sour and bitter food a lot.
Ooh, what's your favorite sour food right now?
Oh boy. I use preserved lemons in a lot of things, so that I make my own preserved lemons. So I throw them into everything, and that makes everything sour. All salads, all kinds of things.
I love that. That's super fun. I love lemons too, like lemon bars, everything. That's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Rick. We also have the illustrator of Our School Garden, who is Christy Hale. Hi, Christy.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
Oh, good. Very good. Thank you.
Christy has illustrated numerous award-winning picture books, including Our School Garden. So you see this wonderful cover here. She illustrated that. She is also the author and illustrator of many acclaimed children's books, including Waterland, Land and Water Forms Around the World. Her newest book is Copycat, Nature-Inspired Design Around the World. She is also an art director, designer, and educator, and offers programs for all ages. So, Christy, I'm going to ask you the same question. Would you rather eat something spicy or sour?
Spicy.
Spicy.
I love like Mexican food and Indian food, and so I say spicy.
Spicy. Do you have a favorite spicy dish right now?
Well, I mean, I know this is I'm not sure that this in itself is spicy, but I love things that have cilantro added to them. And I know that cilantro is one of those yes or no types of plants that people either are on the no cilantro or the yes cilantro. And but I think of cilantro in spicy food. I don't know that it's spicy itself. I guess peppers and things too. So salsas.
Salsas, I love that. I also like cilantro, but my husband does not because it tastes like soap to him.
That's what I've heard, is that a lot of people think it tastes like soap.
Yeah. Well,
I guess I like soap.
Thank you both so much for joining us. So how about you, students? What do you like? Do you like spicy or sour? In the chat box, let us know what you like. Do you like spicy or sour? And as you're answering that, I have a question to kind of get us started here. So, Rick, maybe we can start with you. What inspired you to be a part of telling this story?
You know, my family always had a garden, so I grew up, well, as a kid, one of my chores was to weed, of course. Isn't that always? But also slug patrol. Our garden had a lot of slugs that would, you know, chew on the leaves of things. So I always worked in the garden, but my grandparents were farmers. Actually, my earliest garden memory is one of my best memories from childhood. I was 4 years old on the 4th of July. I had to go out and pick new potatoes. And we lived in the field right next to the farm, and going out there and you know, digging under these green bushy plants that look nothing like potatoes, and finding these bright golden nuggets like the size of my thumb. It was like digging for buried treasure. So that's one of my best childhood memories. And so when my school decided to expand our school garden from just 2 beds that 2 teachers were using to make it big enough for the whole school to use, I was the school librarian, and I joined the school garden committee. to build this garden. And the PTA funded it, but they also funded buying books for the library to kind of get students jazzed about the idea of the school garden. And when I went to buy books, there were a lot of gardening books for kids, and there were school garden books, how to do a school garden books for adults and teachers, but there wasn't a single school garden book for kids. And so I told Philip Lee this, who's who's a friend of mine, but who's also a book publisher. And he told me, just go ahead and write it. And so I did, and Philip actually ended up publishing it. So that's how this book got started.
That's super exciting. And I love how you're talking about how, there wasn't anything for students, and just having the idea of a school garden is just a beautiful, connection. So it sounds like to your own childhood and the connection to just connecting with people too. Christy, how about you? What inspired you to be a part of telling this story?
Well, usually what happens when a book is created is it begins with the author. The author submits the manuscript, and the editor, publisher acquires it, and then they select the illustrator. So it's actually very unusual that an author and illustrator have any kind of connection before the publisher, editor makes the connection. So Philip Lee, before he was the publisher of Readers to Eaters, he was the publisher of Lee and Low Books. And he contacted me back in 1991 to be his art director and designer. So I worked for a long time with him and have known him for a very long period. So when he began this publishing venture, he invited me to illustrate this first title. And so that was how I came into the project. But it was exciting to be able to do such a wonderful book about gardens.
Absolutely. And I love how you mentioned how, sometimes we don't realize how that connection is made. How do we figure out who's that illustrator that's going to really bring a book to life? I love that. And it's such wonderful illustrations.
Thank you.
Rick, I have a question for you, because a lot of our school garden is poetry. So what is your step to writing? How do you approach writing when you either, looking at our school garden or just in general, how do you approach it?
Well, I write every day. And so that's part of it. It's not, you can't wait or sit around and wait for creativity. You have to you just have to do it. But for the book, it was all based on research. So all the little nonfiction blurbs came first, and I did a lot of research, both reading, as a librarian. I started with books, reading websites, reading articles, and then talking to experts. And then I visited lots and lots of school gardens. And when I ended up with all this information, it was all over the map. Different science teachers wanted to use the school garden for this. Art teachers.
Okay, our boys can't handle it, so we'll have to shut it off. So go on back to your seat.
Go ahead.
Anyway, so I ended up, I do write poetry, and it ended up seeming like that was what would tie it all together, that research.
Wonderful. So you're thinking it's a bit of research and then just writing every day and making sure that you're connecting to your creativity as well. I love that. Christy, how about you? How do you approach, figuring out your drawing process?
Well, like Rick, I also do a lot of research, and for any book, there's many, many things. And of course, Rick was the springboard for all my research. So if I needed to research a pill bug, I did a lot of things about a pill bug. If I wanted to do something about a folk tale, about pulling out a vegetable, I'd research the folk tale, or making a special kind of soup. So I took my cue from Rick, and then part of the process, I think you have, I don't know if we are advancing these slides at all, but I start by creating sketches. And before I do any of the color art, I need to create black and white sketches. And one way to think about it is, if you were building a house, you wouldn't just go outside with a bunch of boards and nails, you'd have a plan. And so before I do the finished art for the book, I have to have a plan. So part of the design of this book includes both Rick's poems and the nonfiction information. So I'm also a book designer. So I would lay out the book and all of the poems appear on the background of the page, and all of the nonfiction information is in white type against a dark background. So that was one thing I did, and they're different sizes of type. But then I tried to create black and white sketches, and you'll notice if you have a copy of the book, if you look at the book, there's differences between the sketches and the final art. And that's kind of the point of doing the sketches. It gives you an opportunity to decide whether you need to make some changes. So you'll be able to see if you look at, let's see, the first one in the second row is the one about the pill bug. And you'll see if we go to the next slide that it's the sketch is different from the final art. And this happens various times, and publisher Philip Lee encouraged me to come in closer. And if you think about it, this is a poem about pill bugs, and so they are the star of this illustration. So instead of featuring lots of kids, if I zoomed in closer, like a filmmaker or a cameraman can zoom in the camera. So if I come in closer, you can see more details about the pill bug. So some of the decisions that I make have to do with deciding what's important and where I want you to look as the reader.
So Rick, I have to wonder a little bit here. Why pill bugs? What made you want to talk about those?
They were my favorite bug when I was a kid. I was fascinated with them. We called them potato bugs where I grew up. My wife called them roly-polies. She's from Seattle. I'm from New England. And I got interested in. I wanted to do one bug in the garden, one insect of some kind, and it's just one of my favorites. They're so cool. I always used them as a teacher when I was an elementary school teacher. I'd always have the kids study them. They're easy to find, and they're just wonderful. They're just wonderful to watch.
I love hearing that, because sometimes we always think of bugs and we're like, ew, gross, but they're so fascinating and fun to like watch, and if you feel comfortable touching them. Hey, students and teachers, what's your favorite bug to find in a garden? Go ahead and type in the chat what your favorite bug is to find in a garden. So another question I have, because you've been talking a little bit about how, the illustrator and the author sometimes don't always work together. But from my understanding is that, this is a little bit different for our school garden, where for our school garden, there was a little bit of a teamwork. So how does teamwork play into the creation of this book?
I'm going to put on my art director hat here for a minute. And again, I've worked in-house at several publishers and worked as a consulting art director. Usually there is not communication between the author and the illustrator. And the reasoning is that the author has had kind of the freedom to create separately. And now it's time for the illustrator to have some freedom to create separately. And the publisher editor sort of acts as the go-between. However, it's always important when you're doing some kind of informational book to make sure that the illustrator is accurate and that they are getting the right ideas across. So one of the things that I wanted to know about is how to lay out this school garden. So I think there's a slide here. Rick was really helpful, and he drew a map of the garden, and I'm not sure I followed it precisely, but it gave me sort of an idea for how to lay out more of an overview of some of the gardens, so that you can see some of the things that he noticed: the different beds, different benches, and compost pile. I think this is turned around a little bit, but there's he was helpful, really helpful in providing that for me to guide me.
Absolutely. That's fantastic. And I love, it's so interesting to hear about that, because sometimes when people think of writing books, they think that the author, has that direct connection to the illustrator. But as you're mentioning, Christy, that's not necessarily true. Rick, how does that feel when you kind of give freedom to someone different?
It's well, I mean, I feel like I lucked out getting Christy as an illustrator. I mean, these illustrations add so much to the book. They're so textured and yeah, it's just, they're so wonderful, and it's just, I mean, I couldn't have illustrated it myself, so it would have no one would have bought it. So it's great to have an illustrator, and I understand that they need that creativity. They need to be able to approach it that way. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. And so like the idea is that there's also a book that even if people aren't talking together, it takes a lot of people to make a book sometimes too.
Yes.
And there's one page I wanted to talk about specifically from Our School Garden. And that's it's one of my favorite pages, which is this one, where it's full of food riddles. And so Rick, you had written these riddles. How do you go about writing a riddle?
Riddles are just they're just they're just a guessing game, and you use a clue or clues. So if you research, you just have to. There's in the case of these food riddles, you have to either research about the fruit or vegetable, or just look closely at it, or think about how you prepare it for food. Any of those things can give you a clue. Sometimes it's the vocabulary. I have the one I have many eyes but never see, and that's because we say potato. Those little dots on potatoes that actually each one could sprout a whole new potato plant if you cut it up. We call them eyes. It's like the ears of corn, which I know you have you had a riddle of. So, that's just a word that we use about or head of cabbage. So you can use those words too, but there are many different ways you can come up with a clue.
I love that. And you kind of gave away my first one, but I was going to ask, I made some riddles here to help us kind of think about making and writing riddles. So I want to ask both of you, Rick and Christy, if you can figure out my riddle, and then students in the classroom and teachers, write your answer in the chat. So here's my first one. Okay. You cut me up and scoop out my guts. At night, I will glow.
Ooh, I know.
What could that be?
I'm gonna let people in the chat write.
Oh, they're coming through. They're saying pumpkins. Yeah. Pumpkin.
Yeah.
Christy, we're like, I knew. What were your thoughts?
Well, the scooping out right away is like, what is something that you scoop out, so that's one of the things I think about, unless it's spaghetti squash, but those don't glow at night.
No, they don't glow well at night. So using some background knowledge too. Okay, I think we have time for one more. Okay. See me in many Iowa fields. I grow pods of seeds to be harvested. I'm not just a bean. I'll read it again. See me in many Iowa fields. I grow pods of seeds to be harvested. I'm not just a bean. What could I be? I love it. We have peas. Oh, maybe soybeans.
Yeah, that would be my guess.
Okay,
but I don't know Iowa well enough.
But what makes you think a soybean?
Just because it could be something else. I mean, peas you're just going to eat as peas, but you don't make. Soybeans are primarily used to make soy products, so that's why it would be my guess.
Yeah, so it is a soybean. I love that. Well done, everybody. So, we also have an activity that we want to encourage you all to do. And I'm going to go on to our next slide because it's thinking about our own riddles. And I'm going to pass it over to you, Rick.
Yeah, so, like I said, a riddle is just a guessing game using a clue or clues. And you just have to think about your fruit or vegetable. But what we're doing is basically a greeting card. You take a piece of paper, fold it in half, But instead of the picture on the outside and the writing on the inside, which is how a greeting card works, your writing would go on the outside, which is your riddle, and you open it up and the picture tells you what your answer is. And so, you just have to think about a fruit or vegetable. I like an easy one would be, about taste. Eat me and pucker your lips. And, that would, of course, would be a lemon. A hard one might be one that I couldn't have gotten when I was a kid. So it could be knowledge about this vegetable. So my cousin, the carrot, is such a show off. I prefer to hide in the dirt. So it's something that would be like a carrot, but it's not a carrot. And so I did not know this because my mother never cooked these, but this is a parsnip, and it's like a carrot, but it's just tan colored, and maybe a little bigger. So so you just have to think if you think of a fruit or vegetable, just think of one characteristic of it, and that can be your clue. So I'm going to turn over the answer part now to Christy.
Okay,
Like
you
how
want to
would
switch?
draw your clue, how you would
Okay.
draw the answer.
Oops.
Oops,
So
there we go.
I don't like to give too many directions about drawing because you are all brilliant artists, and I think that you can come up with ideas on your own and observations on your own. But just some simple tips to keep in mind is when you think about your fruit or vegetable, first of all, just think about the general shape of it and start off with a simple shape. Like if it was corn, you might have a very long kind of oval. If it was a lemon, you might have more of a rounded kind of an oval. If it was a parsnip, it might be like a long triangle. So that's a way to start drawing. And then also, usually your fruit or vegetable has an identifying color. And so if you try and match or, think about a color that will help people know, identify your fruit or vegetable. But then the details, I leave those to you because I think that's where you are going to have fun. You can do little kernels for the corn or husks and leaves for the lemon, a little puckered dimple or stick out part of the end, some nice curly foliage for the parsnips. You can really have fun making these your own illustrations, your own art.
I love that. And I'll be honest, when I saw this slide, I got really excited because my husband is an illustrator and he goes into schools. And the first thing he does is, we're going to draw, but we use shapes. And
Yep.
so I was so excited to see this slide and how, drawing can be intimidating, but we can break it down to shapes and then have fun with it because we all are creative. And especially when we can think about making a riddle and having an idea of what we want to draw. Absolutely. So everyone, I think if you, your teacher might have given you a sheet of paper and you can make your own riddles in the classroom, just like how we talked about here. But what I'd like to do now is I want to kind of turn it over to all of you for questions. What questions do you have for Rick or Christy? Remember, all you need to do if you have a question is you're going to use that raise hand feature. Perfect. Mr. Peters' classroom, go ahead and unmute and you can ask your question.
How long did it take to make the book?
Ooh.
That's a very good question. It takes quite a while. I did my first version in about a month. It took me, but then it goes to the publisher and he told me to rewrite it, and then I rewrote it, and then it goes to an editor, and they told me to rewrite it, and I rewrote it, and then it goes to Christy, and she has all the illustrations. She can talk about the art part. What I found interesting was at the very end, I actually had to change a few words on one of the poems because there was a special editor who made sure the pictures and the words lined up. and they didn't line up quite right. And I had to change the writing because that's easier to do than the illustration at that point. But Christy should weigh in on this too. But it took a long time.
I don't remember that, Rick, but it sounds like that was a mistake on my part. But there is actually always some flexibility in that process between writing and illustrating. Usually the manuscript is mostly done when it's handed off to the illustrator, but sometimes changes are made later. In a way, writers kind of distill or make things as clear and simple as they can, and then the illustrator sort of expands visually on the story and is a sort of another voice bringing things to life. So like I said, I did research sketches, and then I started into my art, and my art is a lot of textured papers, prints, and collage.
I love that.
I'd say it took about a year, though, I think, all told.
That's a pretty standard amount of time for creating a book. Yeah.
Here, wow, that's amazing. How about Mrs. Bell? Go ahead and unmute and let's ask your question.
How many books have you ever wrote?
Ooh, how many books have you wrote?
Well, I've only had the one book published. I write a book for my granddaughter every year, and I just make one copy of it. And I have books I finished that aren't published that I'm still working on. So, but Christy has, I can't even answer that question. How many have you written and illustrated?
Well, I've illustrated more than I've written. I've written that are published 6, but then I'm working on another one right now. And well, I actually, like Rick, I always have a lot of ideas going. So I've probably published about 30 books where I've illustrated, and 6 of those that I've also written. Yeah.
Okay, we have about 7 questions that we need to answer here. Mrs. Rotert's classroom, go ahead and unmute, please.
How long did it take to write your poems?
Oh,
yeah, it took about a month to do the first version. And then it took probably another month to write a second version. And after that, it was pretty much done.
Guthrie Center Elementary, go ahead and unmute and ask your question.
What materials did the illustrator use to color the picture?
I used a lot of printmaking ink. So I rolled with a brayer, like it's kind of a roller. I rolled ink on paper, and I painted some, and I also used materials like collage papers and things that I cut up, and then I would paste them down. So brayers, ink, scissors, glue, fancy papers. Those are my materials.
I love that, fancy papers. Mrs. Martindale's class, go ahead and unmute, please.
Why do we have to have veggies and fruits in our town?
Why do we have to have veggies and fruits in the town?
I think it's great to have local fruits and vegetables. I like just having them, we have in Seattle, we have fruit forests where I can go pick fruit on public lands. I live in an apartment now, so I gave up my garden 3 years ago when I moved, but I have a place in the neighborhood I can just go and pick plums or pears or apples or blueberries. And it's just great to just be able to go over and walk over and get fresh fruit and vegetables. Nothing tastes better than fresh.
I'm lucky. I'm in California, and I have a lemon, an orange, and a grapefruit tree in my yard. And so every year I enjoy those fruits, and I make fruit marmalade and make fruit juices, and I can have the fruit in cooking or in smoothies. So it's nice to be able to do that.
And food's so important to all of us, especially with it being, agriculture related too. It's always a part of our lives. So having the ability to have food is a very big positive. Danbury Catholic, go ahead and unmute.
How long did it take it for the illustrator to draw the pictures? How hard was it to draw the pictures?
How hard was it? I'm not exactly sure how to measure how hard it is. I make changes. So sometimes I don't know if you're ever working on something and you don't feel like it's quite right, and you have to keep making it better and better. So there's revision. I'll do something and I'll think, oh no, I don't like how that hand looks, or oh no, maybe that better be in the background and this should be up close. So there's kind of decision making, and there's studying various things that I don't know about. Like, if I haven't drawn something before, I have to find pictures of it to know that I'm showing it correctly. So there's lots of learning for me that has to be done. And usually illustrators are given anywhere from half a year to a year to go from the initial sketch stage to delivering the finished art. And honestly, I can't remember precisely what the timing was on this.
It can take quite a bit of time, but sometimes it's a very quick turnaround. Sounds like it's also dependent on when the publisher needs it as well.
That's right.
We do have a question in the chat from Miss Anderson's classroom, and this is for you, Rick. Why did you choose to write your story in poems?
I guess ever since I wrote my first poem when I was 8 years old, I've written poetry regularly, and I guess it just comes natural to me. I enjoy writing poetry, and it just came out that way. That's really it. I like writing poems.
Love that. Yeah, and having a passion and being able to share it with others. That's amazing. Miss Smeby's classroom.
How many years ago did you start working together, writing a book?
So how many
Was
years
it like
ago?
2009 or 2010?
The book came out in 2012. So it's been over 10 years.
But when we started working together.
That would be maybe 2010, I think.
Okay.
Yeah. So we worked together for a whole year to put it together.
We have just 2 more questions, and I know we're going over a little bit, so thank
That's
you all
fine.
who have been able. Miss Fensroy, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but go ahead and unmute and ask that question.
What was your favorite part of writing the book?
My favorite part of writing the book was when I learned a lot about the history of school gardens. I don't know if you can see this because it's kind of small. This is a picture of a school garden from 1905 in Seattle, and I found out that over 100 years ago there were more school gardens than there are now, and they were bigger. And so it was really interesting to learn about the whole history of school gardens. And there used to be something called the United States School Garden Army, and over 2 million kids belonged to it. And that was during World War I. They did not have enough food in the United States. And so they asked school kids to grow the food, and they gave them the seeds. And these huge school gardens would feed people in the neighborhood, not just the families of the school at the school. So it was really interesting for me to learn about that.
Christy, what was your favorite part of the book?
Well, I like Rick, I love learning about different things. And so as I noted, when I'm researching to do an illustration, I have to dig down and find out various things. And I was really fascinated, like all the old posters that were for school gardens, and I don't know, just many things that I learned about. That was fun.
Wonderful. And then our last question here to just wrap us up is Sievert's classroom.
What made you want to be an author and illustrator in the first place?
Well, I'm a librarian and I'm in love with books, and I always have been. So it was really interesting for me to write a book and go through the whole process of seeing it published, since my whole world revolves around reading and books. So I found it fascinating just to be part of that process rather than just a reader for once.
And for me, when I was young, when I was in 5th grade, my best friend and I were really interested in the books that our teachers read aloud to us in class. And one book in particular, I feel like it was the beginning of my career. Our teacher read to us Harriet the Spy, and my best friend and I wanted to start our own detective agency. So we had notebooks just like Harriet and Harriet the Spy, and we started making observations and sketches, and we'd bring them back to my friend's house and we'd share them. And we were interested in other people's stories. And so it led to us starting to write our own stories. So we would rush home every day after school and write and illustrate stories together. And so it was really at that time that I decided that's what I wanted to grow up and become. And my friend grew up and she became a writer and editor. So I think that the things that you play now, the things that matter to you, may have some clues in the riddle of who you will become.
I love that. I love that tie back too. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. If you have other questions, please type them in the chat and we might be able to I might be able to send them on. But let's go ahead and thank everybody for joining us, and also thank Rick and Christy for joining us and sharing about their work in our school garden.